Dr. Bob McBride, Superintendent of Lockport Township High School, and I'm so glad that you're joining us tonight for a difficult and a challenging subject. It would probably be easy enough to say that at the holidays, it's not a holiday for everyone. And it might be simple enough for us as a high school district to say, let's be thoughtful at the holidays. But really, suicide awareness and mental health is something that our school board is very concerned about. Concerned enough about the safety of our students that we have a partnership with KidsMatter that I want to talk about just in a moment, but also serious enough that several years ago, actually 3 years ago, even before it was state law this year, we began to print on the back of our student IDs helplines for students so that students knew that they could text for help, they could always call for help if they're in that moment, because we never want our students, and really for that matter, adults, to make a permanent decision to a temporary mental health situation. And tonight, our Board of Education is in partnership with KidsMatter because what we know, KidsMatter is a non-for-profit. I'm going to let Nina Menace introduce KidsMatter and introduce our speaker for this evening. But it really is an organization that's dedicated to the safety, the well-being, and the resilience of youth, but also the resilience of those of us who are adults who are parenting and educating students so that we can take care of ourselves too, because I think you're going to hear a lot of things tonight that speak to you as well. A few things where I'm at just as a human being, certainly we've had national news about, a celebrity, an individual who lost his life to suicide. I was sharing with Ryan and with Nina this evening that superintendents in the state of Illinois are organized into regions. And over the weekend in our region, a really big region in Will County, we learned that one of our superintendent colleagues that many of us know lost his life to suicide. And of course, for all of us, the care and the safety emotionally, physically of the students that we parent and that we educate is really our top priority. So we partner with KidsMatter as a very robust resource as a Board of Education, as a district, to provide us as professionals with resources, to provide you as parents and community members with resources. So it gives me a lot of pride to introduce Nina Menace. She is the executive director of KidsMatter, and she's going to introduce our speaker for this evening. So let me turn it over to you, Nina, on this very important subject. Thanks so much for supporting us and being here tonight.
Thank you, Dr. McBride. Thanks for inviting us, and we really appreciate our partnership and look forward to Ryan's presentation this evening. As you mentioned, KidsMatter's mission is to build resilient kids who say no to destructive choices and yes to endless possibilities. And we're in our 21st year of doing that work, and we're really honored to be a part of the conversation this evening. And as we're going through the presentation, if anyone has a question, if you wouldn't mind putting the question in the chat, and we'll monitor that. Dr. McBride and I will monitor that throughout the presentation. But at this time, I'm going to go ahead and introduce Ryan Lauterwasser. Ryan has worked for Linden Oaks Hospital since 2005. And is currently the manager for the Adolescent Inpatient Unit and Eating Disorders Services. His work with high-risk youth for more than 20 years developed into a passion for building hope and helping others believe in the possibilities of change. Ryan received his master's degree in clinical psychology from Wheaton College and is licensed as a licensed clinical professional counselor and is also a certified alcohol and drug counselor. The therapeutic model which guides his practice is grounded in the theory of relationship and aligns with the principles from acceptance and commitment therapy. Enhancing the quality of relationship with objects like self, others, institutions, possessions, or media provides opportunities to promote balance and healthy engagement with one's values. And it really is my pleasure to turn it over to Ryan Lauterwasser.
Nina, thank you so much. Dr. McBride, thank you. It's a pleasure to be here to help support the conversation today in the school system, and I'm very grateful for this opportunity. So I'm going to go ahead and start looking a little bit here at the presentation and just in what we're doing tonight. And we're talking about suicide prevention, and not just about prevention, but why it's important to talk about it. So we'll have an opportunity to go through some things, but while we get set up for the presentation and I share a little bit, I just want to start just with my just a polling opportunity for you. If you'd like to participate in the polling this evening and you'd like to do that, if you want to pull your cell phone out, you can text Ryan Lauterwasser 664 to 22333. If you'd like to do the polling tonight, you don't have to. This is a little bit of, challenge by choice, I guess is what I like to call it, but it could be a fun opportunity for you and experience. I've worked with high-risk youth now for, over 20 years. I started by doing working in a psych hospital originally, then went to do some wilderness therapy, taking high-risk youth out to the wilderness environment and using that as an opportunity to change. I was brought back to the inpatient psychiatric world, and the opportunity really to instill hope in kids that are struggling is really a passion that I have and a mission that I really want to follow through with. And as I continue my career and continue to really inspire hope. But what we've recognized too, as we work with the youth, is that the families and the parents also need the support. And so many parents are just looking for opportunities to say, how can I connect with my youth? How can I help support them? And so the opportunities that we have this evening to start that and to have this conversation is exciting for me, and hopefully it'll be beneficial for you as we go through it. So some of the opportunities here this evening, as we look at it, as you go through, I'd really like you to take a look at the screen in terms of a knowledge check. You may have some of this information, you may know kind of what to expect here in terms of just talking about suicide and the warning signs and supportive behaviors and the resources available, that these are some topics that we'll go over this evening and do that. And so to get started, actually, if you did the polling, I want to pull up my first poll, and I just want to make sure it's working. You can see at the top of the page there that you can still see that you can text Ryan Lauterwasser to 664 or Lauterwasser 664 to 22333. And then if you did that and you join the poll, if you choose an A, B, C, D, or E and just hit send, it should show up on the screen so we can kind of test it out to see if it's working. What is one of the first things you did this morning? It's going to show in percentages. So if everybody chooses the same thing, it'll show 100%. If different people do different things, then it'll show a little bit of a difference in that and things like that. But if you want the opportunity to participate in the poll, again, at the top of the screen, you can see the how you can join in, and you can do that. And throughout the presentation, we'll have different polling questions that you can participate in if you'd like to, as we go through the presentation and do that. So we're going to shoot on over here. It looks like most people get up and go to the bathroom, take a shower. Awesome. So as we jump right in, the first question we really have here really is to talk about teenagers and really what are the suicide rates for teenagers. So the question is, teenagers have the highest suicide rates of any age group. Just want to get a sense if people believe that this might be a myth or is this a fact? Where do you sit with that? And if you want to enter into the poll and have an opportunity here just to respond to that, that'd be great. And we'll kind of see where our audience is here this evening and talk a little bit more about that. Yeah, so it's looking like the majority of people believe that that might be a myth, that teenagers do not have the highest suicide rates, and that would be true. It's the population 85 and older. Our older adult population actually has the highest suicide rates of any age group. Our teenagers are just underneath them in terms of that when we talk about kind of suicide rates and doing that. The next question we have here is looking, more males die by suicide than females. And just kind of taking a look at that and looking at what the statistics might show, or just where we believe that might, people might sit with that, but just the idea that, in terms of our gender differences, if we have more males or females that may die by suicide. Kind of a split group that we have going on. So as we look at, we'll look at some of the numbers tonight, but we will see that females, they attempt suicide more frequently, but males do die more often than females by suicide. And a lot of that has to do with the lethality of the means that boys choose or males choose to die by suicide. So let's jump into the presentation a little bit here. We'll talk a little bit more about what we have going on and look here a little bit about some of these statistics. So as we jump right in, Center for Disease Control and Prevention, they do a lot of research about suicide, a lot of things that just in terms of health in general, but a lot of the statistics we talk about tonight will come from them. So suicide is the second leading cause of death for adolescents 10 to 19 years old. Interestingly, the leading cause of death is accidental death, right? So accidents is the only thing above suicide. And what we know about accidents when we look at the research and the statistics is that we're talking about car accidents. We're talking about things like maybe stunts that adolescents might do, like maybe they feel like they could jump from one tree to the next tree and they mistime the jump and they fall and things like that. So there are a lot of questions about some of the accidents that are reported. Could those have really been suicides rather than accidents? But they're classified as an accident, but it's the data is a little fuzzy from that standpoint. However, for our adolescent population, suicide is the second leading cause of death. And so it's something we really want to be aware of from a health perspective and moving forward. So we've noticed here in this last year too, that overall the reporting of high school students is really at an all-time high for reporting thoughts of suicide, seriously considering taking their life. And our LGBTQ community really has higher rates than any other of our populations, not only just for the thoughts of considering suicide, but also the attempts of suicide. And so when you start breaking down some of the data and you're looking at that, I think it's really valuable for us to understand what populations of students are more at risk. How do we really attend to them? How do we meet those needs? And how do we really focus on providing the intervention that we need to for that? On this next slide that we're going to talk about, I think is really relevant, and it really gives a really good overview picture of what's happening. So for every suicide death, there are 4 hospitalizations for suicide attempts, 8 emergency department visits, 27 self-reports, and 275 people who seriously considered suicide. To look at those numbers, it's just phenomenal to me to see how much that this presence of suicide and suicide in our community and the things that have happened, how readily available people see, as Dr. McBride said, this permanent solution for temporary pain and problems. And it's so much more relevant today than it has been in the past, and the options that are out there. I think as we have really worked on the stigma of mental health, and I think there's more media out there. We'll talk about that a little bit more later, and just opportunities to be exposed to what the concepts of suicide are all about. And we definitely see it in the actual numbers that are reported about how the community is responding to that. So this chart is a really interesting chart in terms of just females versus males in terms of weekly emergency department visits for suspected suicide attempts. So this is not a suicide death slide. It's more about an attempt slide, but just the prevalence of the disparity between females and males. I think that's relevant for people to see. And so you can kind of see that clearly. The other thing that's really valuable to know, and I want to talk about here, is that from 2008 to 2019, there's a 30% increase in the reports that adolescents had made between 12 and 17 about feeling depressed, hopeless, and having more suicidal ideation, right? So these statistics were already on the rise before 2019. And 2019 was already kind of a peak part for adolescent culture and the prevalence of suicide. And then we had COVID, right? So COVID just multiplied the concern so much more. And we can talk about all the reasons of COVID and what the results may have been for that. And we can go down that road and talk about that. I mean, from the social isolation to watching family members pass away because they got COVID, because they were, having to figure out new lifestyles. I think about the number of athletes that weren't able to complete sports programs and may have missed scholarship opportunities and things like that. So major life changes for everybody. And for our adolescent population that it resorts on social connection and stuff, COVID just exemplified the issue, right? So, but I think it's valuable to kind of look at this and note that we were already dealing with a suicide crisis prior to COVID. And after COVID, it was just phenomenal. Here at the hospital at Linden Oaks, I can say that during the COVID time period, we were the busiest that we've ever been. We took over 2 different units. We had about 35 kids on average in the hospital at any given time getting treated for suicide. and the thoughts, the attempts, depressed, hopeless, really because of trying to adjust to some of the world and what was going on from a COVID standpoint. So it's amazing just kind of the impact that this pandemic has had on our youth and on the world in general. And then again, just coming back to just the willingness to kind of participate in some of the suicide ideation. So let's jump back to our polling questions here real quick. If you still got your polls up, and let's look at our next question. The question is, suicide can be linked to a single cause. If we think about why people may choose suicide as an option to manage their problem, do we feel like that suicide can be linked to a single cause? Do we think that's a myth, or do you think that's pretty much a fact? Yeah, that is a myth. So the idea that if there's no one single cause that we can really pin on suicide, and we'll talk about that in a little bit. And the idea really behind that is it's too dynamic of an issue. And if we had a single cause for why people chose that as an option, I think we'd be much more successful in preventing that behavior from happening. And so we want to be thoughtful as we look at that. And the other thing is suicide hereditary. Is this something that can be passed down from generation to generation? And is this something that we really want to be thoughtful about in terms of like family history and things like that? Yeah, I see that looks like our responses are in, and again, yes, it is more of a myth. So there is no genetic factor for suicide. There's no gene that you can pass down. I know when we talk about mental health, we talk about depression or anxiety or obsessive compulsive disorder or some of these other disorders being hereditary, that there could be a gene that's passed down. There's a lot of research that went into looking at a depressive gene that may be seen in families and passed down, but suicide is not one of those opportunities. So there is no single factor. One of the things that I'd like to share a little bit is that society has opened up doorways to really talk about suicide, but also sensationalize suicide, to glorify suicide. I really struggle. There's a series on Netflix called 13 Reasons Why. So if you've seen the series, it's pretty graphic in some of the things that they talk about in terms of suicide, sexual assault. But it follows the kind of these are the reasons why a youth might choose suicide as an option. The challenge I have with that is that when we're in the confines of talking about suicide with professionals in a school system, here at the hospital, in groups, and there's guided discussions, I think they can be very healthy discussions for adolescents to be a part of. And we need to continue to do that. When you're sitting at home in your room, maybe even with your friends, and you're watching an entertainment show about suicide, and it's almost appealing in some ways when they can say, oh, I relate to that. Oh, this must be my option. I struggle with that. I struggle with the glorification of, or the sensationalism around the behavior. So I probably could go on for a long time talking about it. So I think 13 Reasons Why is just one show of many that suicide has become more prevalent of a entertainment value type of thing that is shown. And I really feel like this influences our youth. I feel like our youth are very impressionable. I feel like they can connect to things like that. And I want to be thoughtful about kind of what we're exposed to. So as you're thinking about how can I support my youth, one of the things that I'd really encourage you to think about is how can I monitor the things that they watch? How can I monitor the shows that they're watching? And if they're choosing to watch a show, can I watch it with them? Or can I watch it without them so that I can have conversations with them about it and what's going on? So there's so many risk factors. We'll talk about risk factors and warning signs to suicide as you know, we'll talk a little bit more about that throughout the presentation here. But I do want to say, hope is really hard work. And if you've ever been in a spot in your life where you feel hopeless, it's you know a little bit about the depth of despair that people might feel, and they're trying to figure out how to find solutions for their life, right? So and for a lot of our youth that are trying to manage school and parent relationships and peer relationships and coaching relationships and teacher relationships, and they start to feel burdened and overwhelmed. But I believe most people don't want to die. Most people don't want that. They feel like they ran out of options, and they start feeling the burden of hopelessness. And that's something I think that we can really work on and target. And when it comes to this idea of like, how do we prevent suicide? It's looking for these warning signs, and hopelessness is one of these warning signs that we can look for to say, how can I intervene with my youth, and how can I talk with my child? How can I support them if I see kind of this happening? We can also reduce some of the stigma, fear, and prejudice around suicide. We'll talk a little bit later too about just how we can talk about it and the words that we can say, and so that we can start opening up conversations and talk more about it with people. So one of the questions I get a lot from parents is, how do I know if my child has a disorder or they're just part of regular adolescent development? My child, like, I've got 4 daughters, right? The older 3 like to spend a lot of time in their room. And I want them out of the room. I want them hanging out with me. They don't want to hang out with me. Like, I'm their dad. I was cool once. I have a 1st grader who still thinks I'm super cool and she'll hang out with me, right? But my older kids, they're just not into it the way that my 1st grader is. It was a hard adjustment for me as a parent. For those parents out there that have high school students, and you know what I'm talking about, it just kind of went from this like, oh my gosh, you're my world, to, oh my gosh, get out of my world. And it's a hard transition for us to make, right? So how do we know when it's normal development, or is there some disorder I need to be aware of? And so these questions you see on the screen right here are one of those opportunities that you have to kind of say, hey, let me just do a quick check, right? Does my child have a friend, or are they isolated and they alone and they feel like they don't have anybody, right? Am I willing to talk with them about their friends? Do I know when there's conflict with their peers? Do I know that, right? So does your child have at least an adult to talk to that's not you, right? It's great if your child talks to you. It's great if they do, but do they have somebody outside of you that can do that, right? Do they have an activity that engages them, right? Or more than one activity? And have they stopped doing that activity? Is the time that they're spending in their room isolating from that activity, or are they, or are they just more into gaming online and they're doing all their activities in their room? Those are things that you have to assess. I don't know that. I mean, people make careers out of online gaming. I don't know that my daughters will be the ones that make the career for online gaming. So when I see them spending a lot of time in their room, I'm like, I don't know that they're working on their future plans for their career. Maybe they're really kind of isolating more, and we just need to check in and do a quick check-in. Looking at the times that your child laughs and smiles and seems content with their life. And participating in self-harm behavior. And self-harm behavior isn't necessarily cutting. It could be sexual promiscuity. It could be drug and alcohol use. It could be malnutrition. It doesn't necessarily have to involve self-harm like this, using sharp objects to hurt themselves. There could be other forms of self-harm that we want to be aware of and monitor. And so if you're answering these questions and you're feeling like, oh, I'm seeing, yeah, this kind of speaks to my child. They don't have these things, or yes, they're self-harming, and maybe it's less development and more disorder, right? So, but it's just kind of a check you can do as a parent, that you can look at that and kind of see kind of what we're doing and how we can move forward with that. So, let's see, let's jump back to our poll real quick. So, use of a firearm is the most reported method for suicide. Myth or fact? So this is a fact. So firearm is the most reported method for suicide. I think working with teens, I can say here at the hospital, overdose tends to be what we hear most commonly. But we look at suicide as a whole. The use of the firearm is one of them, and we'll see a statistic here in a little bit that shares a little bit more about that, and we can see that. So as we look at these risk factors and warning signs, risk factors are the conditions or circumstances. So think external to your child. So what are the environmental cues? What are the things that may not be an immediate indicator of risk, but that they're struggling with, right? And so we'll look at a list of risk factors and what that could be. Warning signs are these more emotional behavior cues. So risk factors are external to my child that influence my child. Warning signs are my child and what my child is feeling or showing or displaying that would indicate to me like, oh, wow, they're really an immediate concern for safety that I need to be thoughtful of and I need to kind of follow up on. So as we look at the risk factors, so family, personal, so these are things that are influential, right? So we know there's not a suicide gene for suicide, like for an adolescent, but there is depressive episodes that can happen. There's depression in the family or anxiety in the family, if you have a long history of mental illness in your family, or you know of other family members that struggle, your child is more at risk. That doesn't mean your child's going to internalize that or be affected, but they're more at risk, right? Schoolwork and difficulties. This comes back to the questions I'd ask you as a parent are, do you know what your child's schedule is? Do you know who their favorite teachers are? Do you know what their favorite schedule is? Do you know where there's conflicts with peers, right? Do you know where they're struggling, what classes they excel at, what they enjoy doing? And the school or work difficulties, it's amazing how quickly things can pile up, right? And you may have conversations with your child where you say, you know what, at this point, let's just let those assignments go. I'm okay that you're a B student and not an A+ student, because I know that you're doing your best and I know that you need a break. And those are conversations we really need to think about as parents, about what our expectations are for people to do that. Relationship conflicts follows that same kind of idea. Is my child in their room isolating and alone because they don't have any friends, and that they're fighting, they have conflict with peers? Or is it because of a different issue? They're just more shy and they just need more help getting out of their shell and things like that, right? So knowing your student, knowing who they are, knowing your child, and looking at that. We went through social isolation with COVID. It was a big deal. I really appreciate the school's efforts that they've made to keep students in school. I can say the school districts in our area have initiated new programs, have done more training for teachers, have really worked with students to help them stay in school, to really get those social connections. And I really appreciate the efforts that they're making. I think that opportunity to keep kids connected is one of these mitigating factors that's really helping us. But this idea, like if there is a lot of social isolation and I don't feel connected, that's again, it's a risk factor, right? Stressful life event or trauma. COVID was a stressful life event. Watching your loved ones pass away unexpectedly because of an illness is a stressful life event for a youth. Losing a sporting opportunity. You think, oh man, but let's rate our trauma, like childhood abuse versus I lost a sporting opportunity. It's really hard to rate severity of trauma when it's all based on personal perception. Somebody who's played basketball their whole life and they're really looking forward to their senior year, potentially have the opportunity to go to the state tournament, maybe looking for recruitment opportunities for college, and that whole season was taken away from them because of COVID and they couldn't play and they couldn't do things. That's traumatic for that individual, right? It may be different than somebody else's trauma, but that's a significant event that happened to them that we got to be thoughtful about, that we really got to look at and do. Food, shelter, failure to meet basic needs, our environment, our living situations, chronic health problems or disabilities, right? I'll share a personal story. My daughter came up to me the other day and she was sick this past week and she was very sad. And she's like, Dad, why am I always sick? And she's like, I don't like being sick. I don't want to be sick. And she does frequently get more sick than some of my other kids, right? So, but it's burdensome to her that she feels that way. And it's burdensome to her that she has this experience. And it's hard for me as her father to not have good answers for that. So I'm kind of putting that into my risk factor list to say, okay, like this is really a significant stressor for her. I need to be aware of that. And for students that have disabilities and they're not connecting and they're struggling with day-to-day life, daily like activities of daily living, like walking or carrying stuff, it's significant. I recently had an injury to my arm and I had to have my arm in a sling for a while. And I told several people I've never been so appreciative of having two functional limbs as I was when my arm was in a sling. And that was a minimal injury to my body. But the difficulty it caused me in that short period of time just to do basic things, it was challenging. And for people who live with chronic pain or people who deal with that, my heart goes out to them, and that's a risk factor. How much longer can we expect them to do that? So those are things to talk about. Cultural factors. The risk factor about cultural factors is how does my family, how does my culture, how does my environment, how do we see mental illness, mental health, mental wellness? How do we view the opportunity to go seek help and get treatment? We deal with this a lot at the hospital where there's a variety of different people types that come into the hospital, and not everybody wants to be on medication. Some people don't want to do any medication, which is fine. We can work, that's your choice, and we'll find other interventions to do. Some people don't really believe in mental health treatment. And so we see we see people reaching out for help and wanting to have things be better and trying to find what are the best strategies that we can implement into that home environment that family will support and will carry on. Because it doesn't help us to put a child on medication here in the hospital if the family has no intention of supporting that when they leave, right? So, but that a lot of times can be a familial issue, a cultural issue about just what people are willing to support in terms of intervention and treatment. Here's our slide I talked about earlier about the firearms are the most common method used in suicides. You can see that firearm is 52.8%. This is just recently, the most recent data that the CDC has on that. Suffocation is right up there. And then poisoning is the overdose portion of that. So the other category is things like walking in front of a train, intentionally getting a car accident and driving my car into a wall or a telephone pole, things like that. Some of your more fatalistic kind of opportunities is really what that other category is really talking about. I bring up this slide because if you live in a home where you hunt and you believe and you want to exercise that right and you want to have that for protection for your family, we want to encourage you to have a gun safe. We want to encourage you to keep your ammunition separately from your guns. We want to make sure that your child does not have access to those weapons. And part of our safety planning we do here at the hospitals, we ask this question, do you have weapons in the home and how are they secured? And sometimes we'll even ask families to remove those weapons from the home for a period of time until there's more confidence that the youth is going to follow the safety plan and is in a little better state of mind. So it's not that firearms themselves are bad, right? So it's the idea that we want you to be safe about it. And we want you to make sure that they're locked up and that you're taking care of it and you're being thoughtful about it. And if you need to remove them from the home, that you're willing to consider that and to do that to help protect your child. The warning signs that we talk about here, the acronym that we use is path warm. And you can see what it stands for there, but this idea of isolation, we've talked a little bit about. Substance use, right? It's another warning sign. This idea, if your teenager's engaged in alcohol and drug use, there is some probably recreational, experimental kind of pathways that rite of passage, people might classify that as, and it is illegal and they shouldn't be doing it. And are they masking or coping with emotions and things like that? So all things for you to be aware of when you see your child. If you confront your child and they get irritable and angry and upset at you, the issue might be a little deeper. My experience working with teenage users for a long time is that the more defensive and angry and irritable they get about it, the more committed they are to their use and the more serious of a problem it is. Usually the teens that I've worked with that have less commitment to that behavior and are more open with their parents about it are more willing to have really open discussions about what it is and other alternatives and things like that. So something to be aware of. The purposelessness is this idea of, do I have a place to go in my life? Do I have a drive? Do I have something I can look forward to? What am I going to do with my life? Right. So feeling anxious, trapped, the hopelessness we talked about. Right. So you can see these other signs there. These are things that your child may show that it would be, and they may show that through behavior. They may show that through how they talk to you, right? They may show that through not following through with responsibilities or not completing homework. What does it matter anyway? I'm not going to go to college. I don't have any plan for it doesn't really matter. I'm not going to pass this class. Why do I need to keep doing this, right? They may show that through reckless behaviors, like how they drive, what they're doing with their friends, the jumping from tree to tree. Like this is, this idea like wild stunts, right? One of the things that I'm not really super excited about social media is all the dares that are out there and the trends that you see, whether it's a TikTok trend or dare, and the idea that students are willing to be more reckless to get the views and to see if they're willing to, be sensationalized on social media and get the following. And so being aware of that becomes really important. Is this something that I need to be thoughtful for my child? And are there these mood swings that go back and forth, right? So I just be aware of these. These are things that your child will show you. They'll talk about. They'll say things like, I don't think I have any options. I don't feel like there's anywhere I can go. I don't feel like there's anything I can do. And they'll be almost downcast expressional about it, right? So these aren't necessarily all very happy conversations from your youth when you're talking about things like this. But it's important for us as parents to really be aware of that. as we're talking about suicide, it's really important. What we say matters, right? So we want you to be able to support your youth. We want you to be able to have good ways to intervene and to do that. So there's supportive language and stigmatizing language. So it's saying died by suicide or took their own life is much better than committed suicide. If you think about religious kind of upbringing, you commit sins, you commit crimes, right? This idea that by saying, oh, they're trying to commit suicide, and oh, are you thinking about committing suicide? It somehow brings this negative connotation of guilt or shame or something to this behavior. And what we're really trying to do is we don't want to bring stigmatized language to this behavior. We really want to help open the doors for people to have discussions and talk about it and be free to speak, right? So, but to do that, we really have to be thoughtful about how we talk about it. And it's super important. Even supportive language, attempted suicide versus successful or unsuccessful. And I'll say this is, I mean, working in the field for the last 20 some years, saying they unsuccessfully completed suicide has been a very common language that we've used. So being able to go back to they attempted suicide, it's not whether or not they're successful or unsuccessful. There's nothing glorious or about suicide. There's nothing about successful suicide that's helpful. So we really want to watch the language, and it seems like it's a simple thing to do, but it's not really all that simple. And even as you're thinking about it, when you leave this presentation and you talk to other people about it, and you're talking about maybe somebody in the community that did attempt suicide, you might even find yourself asking the question, oh, were they successful, or were they like it? And to really start putting into your mind, like, hey, I really got to be thoughtful about how I say that, because there really isn't anything successful about suicide. So let's jump back into our poll real quick. We'll look at our next question. So the question is, talking about suicide increases the risk of the behavior. So this is about, can I directly ask somebody, are you suicidal? Or am I asking somebody that, am I going to put the thoughts of suicide into their head? So the question is, talking about suicide, does it increase the risk of that behavior? Yeah, that is a myth, right? So we found that the best way to address suicide is to directly talk about it. And so we'll talk a little bit more about what that might look like or how you can do that. And so another question is, once the suicide crisis has passed, teens still need support, right? So we think that's a fact. We think that's myth. Just the idea that, say they are suicidal, we provide intervention at the time of suicide. Now that suicide crisis is over, do the teens still need support, or we kind of past that now and we've moved on? And absolutely, that is a fact. Teens definitely still need support once they're through the crisis. So start the conversation. What does that look like? So I would say, as a parent, you know your children better than anybody knows your child, right? So hopefully you could say that that's true. It's possible that I have 4 daughters. It's possible the sisters might know each other's cues a little bit more than I do. But typically my gut tells me when something's wrong with my child. They don't always want to talk to me about it, but I typically know. And your gut feeling, research has shown that your gut feeling is based on thousands of hours of observation, not just your observation of like maybe your child, but other people and their children and things that you see in the community when you walk around. So as you think about this idea of, oh man, my gut's telling me something's not quite right, that there's some truth in that. There's something about your senses and what you've observed and what you're hearing that feels off, and research would support like the gut feeling is true. Like we got to pay attention to that because you're observing something that's out of the ordinary or out of the normal. And so you want to follow up on that, right? So listen to that inner voice, approach your child, and it's okay just to walk up to your child and say something. You know, I gave an example of my daughter, Haley, and I just said, hey, I noticed you're spending a lot more time than usual in your room. You haven't been your typical self. Like, what's going on with that? Or, hey, I've noticed things, you just seem a little off lately. Is there something you'd like to talk about, right? It's great. And even that last question, I'm going to go back and say, is there something that you want to talk about? I'd say, hey, tell me something that's happening in your life right now, right? Can I ask open-ended questions? I found that when I asked, hey, how was school today? Oh, good, fine. What did you do today? Nothing. So I say, well, hey, tell me a story of something you did with one of your friends today. Tell me what you learned about in class today, right? Can I make my questions more open-ended that invite conversation rather than give them the out of the 1 or 2 word response? So it takes a little practice to figure out what wording is going to be best with that, but something we really want to be thoughtful of, right? You can go up to your child and say, whoa, you've been really irritable lately. I've noticed the irritation. Let's just sit down and I want to be here to support you. What would that look like if you had my support? What do you need from me right now? Right. So sometimes just making those little observations and letting your child know that you're attentive to them and that you're noticing them is enough to invite some conversation. And again, it's not about having answers. It's really just about creating space and making sure I'm available for that. So the supportive communication, what does it mean, right? What is this really going to look like? We're going to listen. And we're going to really listen, right? We're not going to be thinking about what we want to say in response to whatever they're saying right now. And your child's talking to you and you're forming your response in your head right now. And you're half-heartedly kind of hearing what they have to say. But really what you're thinking about is, ooh, this is what I want to say in response to that right now, because that's way off, right? We want to ask more questions, right? What makes investigators really good is they just ask questions. They don't have a response all the time, but they just validate a concern and they ask another question and they follow up with another question. And so having your child say something where they're really angry at you and you can say, you know, I see that you're really angry with me. Help me understand that again. I hear you say that you don't like it when I do this. Can you help me? Can you tell me a little bit more? Like, what is it about that behavior that I'm doing that really upsets you? Right. And instead of being like, well, I have to say that because you don't listen to me and I have to set rules for my house. And right. So I think too about this idea of, let's go back to my daughter in her room and she's isolating in there and her grades are slipping. I could barge into her room and I could be like, Haley, oh my gosh, I can't believe you right now. You're so lazy. You don't do anything. Your grades, I can't believe this. You're slipping. Well, I'm taking your phone away right now because, man, all you do is be on this phone and that's all you're doing. Get your grades up and walk out, right? Or I could knock on the door. Is it okay if I come in? And I could say, Haley, it seems like you're really struggling with your classes right now. You're really struggling with your grades. And it seems like the strategy you've really been trying to deal with that is by distracting yourself with your phone. I don't know that strategy is working for you. Can we just sit down and talk about what it is you need for support and some other strategies we could identify that might help you get a little bit of this work done? And if it would help you, I can hold on to your phone for a little bit, right? Because maybe this is distracting you from getting your work done. And I'd be willing to hold on to your phone for now until you got this assignment done. And then you could just come down and pick it up, right? Our children are in relationships with their phone. And it is phenomenal, the emotional investment they have, right? And I can't tell you how many conversations I've been in the hospital with parents and their child where children have threatened suicide when the phone is being restricted. I'm going to take, well, if you take my phone away, you're cutting off my social connection with my peers. I just want to kill myself. These are the things that start coming up, right? So how do we help our children have healthy relationships with that, right? And how do I, as a parent, model that healthy relationship with my phone and what I'm willing to do? And am I willing to put my phone to the side and really listen and really come together and connect, right? So something for us to really think about, but listen, really listen to our child and try to understand, seek to understand with this non-judgmental attitude. I had a conversation at the table with my daughters the other night, and I just said, it was probably actually a month or two ago, and I just said, all right, I just want to know something about your life, totally no consequence, no judgment, just something about your life that I don't know that you're willing to tell me right now. And some things popped up at this conversation that I would not have known. And it was a really good insight into my kids and about what they're willing to do and how energetic they are or how risk taker they are or things like that. And it was a non-judgmental, non-consequence conversation. I just want to know something about your life that you otherwise wouldn't have shared with me, you know? So, and it was a great little exercise. I don't know how often I'll do that because I don't know what kind of responses I'll always get, but the idea that they're like, okay, I can share this with dad, and he didn't get mad. He didn't get upset. He didn't reinforce the family values or reinforce the rules. He just sought to understand who I was. He listened to what I had to say. You know, I could validate. Validation doesn't mean agreement. I can validate like, yeah, that sounded like that was a lot of fun for you. I don't necessarily agree that you should be doing that, but that definitely sounded like that was a lot of fun for you, right? A lot of times I think we confuse validation with agreement. I can validate that my child is doing something that they think is fun and they think is connecting with their peers that I don't support without reinforcing to them like I think they're wrong in what they're doing, right? I can say like, oh, I can see that you smoke weed with your friends because you feel like it's really connecting. You guys have fun doing it. I can see how you think that that's fun. That's validating, right? And I can also say, and you realize that, you know, smoking weed is not really a value we have in our house. It'd really be great if you guys could connect and find other things to do. Would you like to have a conversation about how we could connect differently? So thinking about how we have these conversations are really important. I will tell you, I am not perfect at these conversations, and I often get upset, and I often probably, especially, I mean, I have all sorts of concerns as a father of 4 daughters, 3 of them being teenagers. And I will say that there are times I've had to go back to my daughters and I've had to say, I know I got really upset in that last conversation, and I said some things I really probably shouldn't have said. And I want you to know that that's not the kind of dad that I want to be. So I'm going to work on having better communication with you. And I'm going to work on really trying to understand where you're at and do some things differently. And I've had to apologize to my kids for some of the conversations we've had. And I hope that everybody shows a willingness to do that. It shows humility. It shows willingness to connect. It shows that we're not perfect. It shows that we're willing to like admit when we're flawed and come back to them. And it's supportive, because our youth will say, oh, okay, my parents aren't perfect yet. Like, I knew they weren't perfect, but he's saying he's not perfect. Like, maybe they're willing to take a little bit more risk to talk with me, right? So think about that. Taking conversations seriously is so important. Don't ever minimize somebody who wants to talk about suicide. Please don't ever minimize that. Always take that conversation seriously. Always think about the worst that can happen, and don't ever be dismissive about that. Be direct and reassure that you're here for them, reassure that you're here to support them. They may not want your reassurance, but that doesn't mean that we shouldn't say it. My kids don't necessarily like to give me kisses at this point, and that's okay. I get it. They're teenagers, but I can still tell them I love them. I can still give them a hug. I can still kiss them if they let me. And, and I get that they're at a different stage of development than I am. And that's great. I understand that. And I can reassure that they're loved in this house by doing things for them so that they'll feel more open to talking with me. Make sure you have a conversation about planning for safety if for some reason your youth are at risk, right? We talked about the risk factors and warning signs. We want to make sure we review some of that and let your child know what you're observing and some of what's happening. Make a list of healthy behaviors that can be used. So healthy behaviors, like what am I talking? I'm talking about mindfulness activities. So there's one we call 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, which is, what are 5 things that you see right now? What are 4 things, what are 4 things that you can hear right now? What are 3 things that you can touch right now? What are 2 things that you can smell? What's 1 thing that you can taste? And as a mindfulness opportunity to really get them re-grounded with reality and distract them from the crisis, right? But they can create a self-soothe kit that could be have stuff with the senses, right? So there could be candles in there, or cards in there, or essential oils in there, or a book that they like to read, or maybe they do, maybe they're playing mindless games on their phone that can be part of this distraction thing, right? But there's other things that we can work with our kids in terms of healthy behaviors, drawing, artistic things, like tap into the resources your kids have in terms of their strengths, and help them identify supportive people they can talk to. And you may not be the first person on their list. You should be on their list, but maybe you're not the first person. And we have to be okay with that as parents, right? That sometimes our children are anxious about talking to us about some of these concerns. So we're going to provide the environment for them and be okay if they choose to talk with somebody else, because it's more about our kids getting support than it is about me needing to be the one to support them, right? So, but talk with them about that so there can be some willingness to really engage in that. And then secure access to weapons and medications. Because of the lethality of the suicide behaviors, because of the overdose, we really want to make sure that the means that they may have to harm themselves are locked up and they don't have access to it. That becomes so important when we're looking at planning for safety.
And hey,
these are some
Ryan,
resources. Yes.
Ryan, I didn't mean to jump in, but I thought this might be a good place. I saw 2 questions in the chat that might be good right now to get your opinion on.
Sure.
The first question was academic stress. Next week we have final exams. Students have big safety guides. There's a question, study guides. And, there's that feeling that comes with wrapping up and grades are on the line and that kind of stress. That was one question. There's a second question, but I just wonder, any thoughts about academic stresses that students might feel, especially when they start feeling that competition with their peers, feeling that they might not be measuring up. And any thoughts you have, and then I might, kind of listen to you and then throw in the second question in the chat.
Yeah. So my first thought about academic stress, I think as parents, we have to send the message that we're okay with you doing your best, whatever your best might be. There are some students that their best is a C. There's some students that are best as a B, right? But this idea, and there is a lot of comparative value. And the pathway of comparison is a destructive path. We don't ever compare down, right? Our students aren't ever going to say, oh my gosh, I got a C, but half my class got an F. I'm so much better than that. They're going to be like, oh my gosh, I got a C, and the other class got an A. And we tend to compare that in a way that feels inferior to us rather than helps us feel like we're superior. And that's just part of this comparison. So really working with our child about be who you are. It's a self-esteem part, right? It's just part of like, let's be confident in ourselves in terms of we're going to do your best. I'm going to take your best. And when you're playing video games all day, I know you're not giving your best, but when I see you doing your study guides, when I see you spending the time, I can help you study if you'd like to do that. I think it's important that we send that messaging early on. I also think if you know that your student's struggling with mental illness or with anxiety, depression, or struggles with that, the earlier you can involve the school and having a plan in place, the better that's going to be. So having those conversations at the beginning of a quarter, beginning of a semester is much better than the week before a big test, right? So being willing to be open about that. And I will say, even working here at Linden, there is a lot of families and students that aren't super open about wanting the school to be a support for them. And we really work on letting them know that we want the school to support them, because that additional resources, maybe they need a little extra time to take the tests, right? The school can work with you on that and they can provide some of that, right? So those are things that we've got to have the conversations with the school to do, but it's better for those conversations to start earlier. So if we're in the crisis now and they're feeling the pressure of school, I think that reassurance of saying, we only expect you to do your best, right? How can we help you study? What do you need from us to do that? I think that's going to be important conversations to have.
Yeah, that's a great point. And kind of a follow-up to some things we do at school. One of the things we've stressed revision and retesting quite a bit, changed a great deal of our grading policies. And then also many of our teachers next week, just parents should be aware that that traditional exam, that 90-minute exam, 120 questions, many of our teachers have really moved away from that more to a project-based, exactly because that allows students to pull that apart. But kind of a follow-up question there is what if a student's already failing? You know, that's the stressor. I'm so far behind, I can't even get ahead next week. And that is exactly where I would encourage parents to follow up with what Ryan said about reaching out to the school, because we do have PARC, which is a credit recovery, take students offline in that situation to try to recover that credit, and then also provide some services to that student to dig into what might have caused some of the things that were creating that difficult academic performance.
Yeah.
There was another, Ryan, question in there too. I just wanted to throw in, I thought it was a good time, is how do you combat hopelessness? You know, when a youth gets to a place where they are feeling hopeless, how does a parent combat that?
Yeah. So hopelessness, it's the smallest seed of hope, right? So when we talk about hopelessness in the hospital, there's ways that we target that here in the hospital. So a lot of times we do rating questions, right? So if you ask your child in the morning and they see that they're really hopeless, and you said, on a scale of 1, scale it for, it's like on a scale of 1 to 10, 10 feeling you feel the best ever, 1 you feel the worst, where do you feel today? And if they said, oh, I feel like a 1, to say, can you tell me why you feel like a 1 and not a 0? Well, you didn't give me 0 as an option. I know, but you could have said 0, but you said 1. So why are you at a 1 and not at a 0, right? And it's like, why are you at a 5 and not a 4? And it forces them to look at their life and say, well, because I'm a little better than this, right? So it's this idea of hope might start with, thank you, like, hey, they got up in the morning, they came down to eat something. So they're still participating in self-care. And you can say things to your child like, I really appreciate that you came out of your room and you had something to eat today. Thank you for caring for yourself, right? It sounds simple, but you're acknowledging behaviors that are hopeful. And it's important as parents, when we're combating hopelessness, that we really scrutinize what our child are doing in terms of what are they doing that's hopeful. Oh, I'm so glad you got on. They didn't go to school. They feel overwhelmed, but they got online and they played Call of Duty with their friends for 2 hours. I'm really glad that you felt like you could connect with your friends today and play some video games. I'm so glad you're still reaching out, right? So it's just, are you inside like going crazy because your child isn't doing their responsibilities and they're online? Yes, but are you helping instill seeds of hope by letting them know that socially connecting with others and is a good thing to do? Absolutely. And I think as parents, we have to redefine what we're willing to do for expectations. I think sometimes I would much rather have my kid failing and alive than feel the pressure of me saying you have to make these grades, and then they feel like the only way out is suicide, right? So, and it sounds maybe dramatic, and at the same time, it's like we talk to a lot of parents about that. About I would rather have my student, like taking 2 hours to complete a test that everybody else can take in 45 minutes, if that helps them manage their behavior and helps them feel it, even though that seems like my child's a little different than a majority of the class, they need a different type of support, and that's okay. It's okay that our child needs that support. And can I, as a parent, accept that, right? And can I identify the hopeful behaviors that I'm seeing them do, even if that hopeful behavior is that they drag their blanket out of the room onto the couch and they watch TV on the couch instead of isolated in their room. Thank you so much for making the effort to come out of your room and make some movement today to join me out here and spend time with me. Well, I didn't spend time with you. Yeah, but we're in the same space now. When you're in your room, I'm not always in there, but you're out here with me. Thank you so much for doing that, right? So to me, combating hopelessness starts with the identification of small behaviors that we can say are hopeful, and then building on that and reminding our children why we care about them, that we want to support them and their strengths that they have. You'll see on the screen here some resources. Just this 988 number is great. You may have seen a lot of information come out about that this last year. Just about the, it's kind of like instead of 911, you can call 988, and it's a national suicide crisis line. It's super fabulous that they put that together and did that. So, and then also some other 24/7 national hotlines that you see there from SAMHSA, the crisis text line that we sponsor here as part of KidsMatter. You can text REACH to 741-741. And so many students in our community use this crisis text line. We're able to connect with them right away and help get them the resources that they need. Most importantly, use your high school resources. Your school is there and they care about the kids and they want to be available for the families. And so if you have not taken advantage of reaching out to the school social worker or the counselors, the teachers, please do that. These teachers care so much for the students. And I've spent time doing some other training for teachers and stuff like that. And the questions they ask about how do I connect? How can I make a difference? It's amazing to see the investment that they have in the development of your youth. So please use them as well. As we fall to the last slide here, this is kind of where we started, right? So hopefully as you look at these categories, you can see that you have some more information just about talking with somebody about suicide, the warning signs, supportive behaviors, and just your prevention resources. So hopefully you found that informational for you today. If you have more questions or we'll be more than willing to take some time to answer those and continue to stay on the line here.
Yeah, that is great, Ryan. And those were the three questions that we saw in the question and answer. And I'm just checking that, right now. I thought those were very, just some really astute questions. And I appreciate both your perspective as a parent, of teenagers. Many of the people, all the people probably on this webinar are parents of teenagers. And then also, the perspective you bring as a professional as well.
The other thing, real quick, Dr. I think I'd say that the failing question, it's hard. It's hard to see your children fail at anything, a sport, an academic, anything. And can I allow that to happen and provide support? And there may be a time where you need to check in with the school. You may need to let the semester go. We may need to take some makeup class. We may have to reevaluate that. And as a parent, can you do that? Can you shift your expectations of what you thought high school is going to look like for your child and reevaluate? So I just want to make sure we put that out there too. There's always an answer. There's always a solution, always. We just got to find the right one that fits. And sometimes that's going to take us to adjust our expectations or our perspective.
And I appreciate you saying that. And I would just say to the parents and the attendees here as we kind of wrap up towards 8 o'clock, please visit our district website under our guidance page, which gives you so much connection to our school counselors, our social workers. Like Ryan said, reach out to us. We try, through our teachers, through our school counselors and social workers, to be in tune with your students. And one of the things I'm very proud in our school district is we have a very good track record of students doing just that, reaching out when they're feeling in trouble. but we obviously don't always know, and we want to support you and partner with you, and want to make sure that if there's something you're seeing at home that we're utterly not seeing at school, that we can try to respond to that. We can help you. We can respond to your child with so many different mechanisms that we have in place, even in that case where a child isn't academically succeeding. There's a plan for that. We understand that sometimes students just need to pull over, and we need to help them pull over, reset, and then move on. And so please, check that. There's so many resources. In the participants is our director of guidance, Grant Ferkelek. He's listening in. He heads that entire department. So he's listening in as well. So thanks so much. One more question in the chat. I'm going to take that, and we'll probably wrap up. What is the school doing to reduce stress on our children, especially reducing the amount of homework? That is a great question. We actually, the interesting thing that we've really been focusing on, because we've done a number of surveying of students. KidsMatter, the organization on this line, has helped us with the stress survey. And then we've continued to survey students. What students are telling us is this. They are telling us that they feel supported at school. They feel support at home. They feel that they're supported by their teachers. They feel that they can reach out to staff members. What they're saying that they don't feel so strong about is competition with each other is a very, very strong indicator of stress on students. And then also their own resilience. Not sure if that's something coming out of COVID or not, their own resilience to solve problems and move forward. Academic pressures are real, and I don't want to dismiss those at all. We've made significant changes to grading policies and procedures, but students do not report to us when we survey them, and we've done in the past year and a half, I think somewhere close to 4 to 5 surveys. They are not reporting homework and academic work as the kind of pressure that's giving them hopelessness. They're reporting pressure that they feel on themselves, pressure that they're feeling in terms of competition with others. So that doesn't mean to excuse that or not be mindful of that. But what it's really done is we've really redoubled our efforts in helping them with their own executive functioning. How do they manage their own work? How do they manage themselves? How do they have a conversation with the people around them about what they need? You might realize the biggest thing we've done in terms of academics and homework is Compass, having 4 times a week where students are available to ask their teachers about assignments, also to work for 40 minutes on assignments if they need it, and then inserting on Wednesdays a late arrival so students can take a pause in the middle of the week, using time to try to address that very concern. Perfect, probably not, but it's the work that we are doing, and an acknowledgement of that kind of work that needs to be done. One more question in there. This is a really good question, a clinical chat question, Ryan. What do I do if my child just comes out and says, I want to kill myself or I want to die? What are the correct steps to take? What would be the next kind of parenting move to do if a child says that?
Yeah, so I think so we're going to add, the first thing I want to say is that you're probably on your way here to do an evaluation for safety, for suicide, to see if they need a higher level of care that we can help keep them safe, right? So if your child comes directly out to you and says, I want to kill myself, I want to die, first of all, I want to applaud you as a parent that you've created the space and the relationship with your child that they're sharing that with you. Secondly, you can talk with your child about that by starting to ask some exploratory questions like, I'm really sad to hear you say that. Is there anything I can do to support you right now? Is there something you'd like to talk about with me? And we can look at that, and I'd want you to invite your child to say, I'd really like to come up to Linden Oaks Hospital, or if this isn't the most convenient hospital, to another hospital, to emergency department, where you can do an evaluation for suicide risk and really get some professional support around that. it's a scary thing as a parent to have your child say that, and then to think that you're going to go to sleep at night without watching your child, right? So, because once your child is that committed that they're saying that this is what they're going to do, I'd really want you to intervene with some more higher level of care, higher level of support. And even if your child gets mad at you or angry at you about that, I want you to fall back on safety and say, I'd rather have my child mad at me that I put them in the car and I drove them to do an assessment rather than I wake up tomorrow morning and they're not with me, right? So it's safety is always going to be the primary thing. I would encourage you to try to ask some exploratory questions, validate, take it seriously, validate their experience, and then let's get to an assessment to see if we need a higher level of care for support.
I know it's a little bit after 8, and we're so appreciative that you're in this conversation with us this evening. This webinar might be ending, some expertise, might be ending, but it doesn't mean that our work with KidsMatter won't continue, and our work in our guidance department won't continue. If I just left you with anything, be sure to reach out to us. We are connectors. We can help. If these things are happening, give us an opportunity to partner with you. You are doing your homework at home. We are always trying to make sure that we're doing our homework at school. So thanks for being with us tonight. Nina, anything to share as we wrap up this important conversation?
No, Dr. McBride, I just wanted to say thank you for allowing us to be part of it. I want to thank Ryan Lauterwasser for doing such an outstanding job on a difficult topic. And I also want to thank all the parents that participated this evening. And we look forward to the next session.